Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Happy Thursday. Hope you've had a wonderful week so far. Of course, it's been another interesting one down at the southwest U.S. border. I say that like we still have a border. It's just sort of a name that we put on this little stretch of land that used to have a meaning that doesn't really now. There's not a whole lot of difference between Mexican soil and Texas soil as far as the Biden administration's willingness to recognize that we do have a border, or at least we're supposed to. We don't need national security. We don't need sovereignty. We don't need to know who's coming in and out of our country. It doesn't really matter. We're just going to let in whoever wants to cross. If you remember, by the way, none of this should be shocking at all. This is actually what Joe Biden campaigned on back in 2020, because you remember the left spent the 4 years before that calling Trump and everybody that voted for him and anybody that believed in even a modicum of common sense border security. They were all Nazis and they just hated foreign-born people and anybody that wasn't, a white Christian male, basically. And the Biden administration actually campaigned on this. He didn't use the term open borders, but all of the policies that he promoted and said that he supported fuel open borders. They exacerbate illegal immigration. As a matter of fact, they invite it. This is what the Obama administration, which Joe Biden served as vice president under, did for 8 years running. Just program after program after program that incentivized illegal immigration. That was the goal. And now we see that ramped up. 11,000 illegal aliens were apprehended crossing the U.S. border in the 24 hours between Sunday and Monday. 11,000 illegal aliens in 24 hours. That's not in a week. That's not in a month. One 24-hour span. Many of them coming through the Eagle Pass sector in Texas. This blows out the previous 24-hour record of 10,000 migrant apprehensions that was just set last week. So again, what we see is this constant elevation. And if you look at videos from the border, it is a never-ending line of people coming across the river 24 hours a day. In the dead of night, in the broad daylight, doesn't matter. An endless stream of people. By the way, these are just the ones that we know about. This doesn't include all of the people that we catch on the regular on surveillance cameras coming in that don't get apprehended. We have a general estimate about how many gotaways come into the country, but nobody 100% knows for sure because, again, border agents are too busy processing the people that turn themselves in and then going and fishing bodies out of the river. We'll get to that in just a second. More than 142,000 migrant encounters were reported in the first half of September alone, according to CBP data. 142,000. This month is going to blow previous months out of the water. It's not even going to be close. And again, if you've been paying attention at all, this is what the Biden administration's policies have been leading up to. This is exactly what some of us were saying was going to happen after Title 42 was rolled back and our borders just got blown open to anybody who wants to come in. All you've got to do is say, hey, I claim asylum. And they say, well, here's your bus pass and your taxpayer-funded support system. You head on off into wherever, and we'll come hollering for you in 3 or 4 years when we finally get to your name in the list in our immigration hearings. And you know what? If you show up to court, you show up. If you don't, you don't. Who's really to say? We said that this was going to happen. Now, of course, the Biden administration attempted to fudge the math. They rolled out their little smartphone app, which I talked about a few episodes previously, that basically allowed migrants who were still in Mexico to check in. And when they crossed the border, same exact way, they crossed the border, they were not calculated as illegal aliens because they had checked in on this smartphone app, but the app was glitchy and people stopped wanting to wait for that. They couldn't get in line. Things weren't working quite right on their phones. Again, all of these poor, destitute, poverty-stricken people who just happen to have smartphones and can check in on this app. That wasn't working out too well. So now we're right back where we started, where people are just butting the line, not paying attention to any programs, not paying attention to this app that they're supposed to be checking in on, just completely disregarding that and coming in the old school way, because that seems to have worked really well in the past, particularly under Democrat administrations. So the Biden administration's response is to send more troops to the border to help process all of these people. So we've got hundreds more National Guardsmen who are being funneled to Texas, and they're not there to help stem the tide. They're not there to turn people back. They're not there to make sure that there's, something set up, I don't know, a barrier of sorts in the Rio Grande, like Texas tried to do, to keep people from actually coming in. No, they're there to help keep the line moving so that border agents can go back to fishing dead corpses out of the river. Because oftentimes this journey into the United States turns horribly tragic, not that leftists care. The body of a 3-year-old child was pulled out of the river just last week. This marks the latest in an endless line of tragedies that go completely unnoticed or just plain uncared about by the Biden administration. According to local reports, this little boy's body was recovered on Wednesday, just north of the floating barriers near Eagle Pass, which saw a stunning 10,000 estimated migrants cross from Mexico between Wednesday and Thursday of last week alone. The Texas Department of Public Safety confirmed that the Tactical Marine Unit got a call just after 3:30 in the afternoon that a child had been swept away from his family by the strong current. Again, we have warned people about the current in the Rio Grande. It's not a creek. It is deep. It does have a strong current, and it is deadly. How many times we have to prove this, I don't know. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late. The unit was able to locate the boy's body and transport him to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. 3 years old. This is the kind of tragedy that open border policy invites every time. And this is hardly the first little child that has suffered for it. A day after the child's body was recovered, the corpse of a middle-aged man was pulled from the river in the same area. And then Fox News' Bill Melugin reports that the body of a 10-year-old child who had drowned in the river was recovered in the same place just the week before. So we've got people dying and drowning and washing up on the shores of the river. We have found corpses on ranch lands and throughout the desert. This is a dangerous thing. This is not simply, well, you get to American shores and everything is hunky-dory and all will be grand. We have children dying. Do y'all remember the videos from a year or two ago of children being dropped from 15-foot walls by human smugglers? Toddlers just being tossed over the wall. Because these people don't care. Human smugglers and traffickers, they don't care. And neither does the Biden administration, because they continue to promote policies that invites this. But hey, Texas is the big bad guy for putting up barriers in the river to try to deter people from crossing it, not only because, it's illegal to do so, but also because it's incredibly dangerous. And maybe if people knew that they couldn't get across this barrier, they wouldn't try to get across the river in the first place, and their 3-year-olds wouldn't be washing up dead on the riverbank. Sometimes we find children that happily have not died. Doesn't really make it any less of a tragedy. However, border agents just yesterday found a 2-month-old infant abandoned at the U.S. border. Thankfully, now this child was found alive. A lot of times, this is not the ending, the happy ending that you would want. A 2-month-old baby abandoned at the U.S. border. It's kind of hard to imagine that the mother of this child would just willingly leave her infant after getting all the way across the United States, would just, decide to leave this baby in the desert. Stranger and more horrific things have happened, of course, but that's a little bit harder to believe. It's much more likely that this child was being used by human traffickers or an adult illegal alien trying to get into the country who knew that a kid would give them a golden ticket to stay. We see this as well at the border. We see adults using children that don't belong to them, sometimes that they have no relationship with whatsoever, that they've nabbed from somewhere. And as long as they claim to be this child's family, the child gets you into the United States. Now, of course, leftists want to roll back things like the DNA program that was under the Trump administration, where if you claimed that you were the family of a child, but there seemed to be something a little bit suspicious, border agents who are trained to recognize when something smells a little bit fishy, and they want to test you to see if your DNA matches the child that you claim is yours. But you can't do that. Right? Leftists don't want to do that. You can't do that because that's invasive. That's, that's oppressing these people. We can't do things to make sure that the parent is actually the parent because that might offend somebody. That's racist somehow. That's xenophobic. So instead, we're just going to let adults bring children across the border. And as long as they say this is my kid and they say they're here to claim asylum, here's your bus ticket, here's your plane ticket. We'll see you in a few years. And what ends up happening is that adult illegal aliens and human traffickers that understand that system will now use children to get across the border and then dump them the minute that they are no longer necessary. And it happens all the time. Back in August, on August 23rd, a 7-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother were found abandoned in Rio Grande City. A few days before that, 2 brothers from Honduras, ages 12 and 4, were found near the Mexico border. They told agents that they had been dumped there by smugglers. Who would have thought? And this happens day after day after day after day because our borders are open. And the people that exploit them have figured out this not very complex system. This is what happens when you have leftist bleeding heart policies that claim to be compassionate, that claim to be about humanitarianism, that claim to be charitable. Look at all of these poor people that are simply fleeing poverty and violence in their home countries. And what you end up creating is a system exploited by evil, criminal people who have no problem at all dumping a 2-month-old infant in the desert as long as it gets them what they want. And the Biden administration is facilitating that. And they know it. They've got the information. You think the administration doesn't have access to this data? They know exactly what's going on. But they turn a blind eye to it and they cover it up and the media doesn't talk about it. All that they talk about is all these poor people fleeing all of these craptastic countries trying to come here for the American dream because that is more politically expedient. Facts and tragedy be damned. Meanwhile, the people showing up on our doorstep and flipping the bird to our laws and our national sovereignty and all the taxpayers who are having to foot the bill for their entire existence, they're not even pretending to respect our nation anymore. We know they don't, by virtue of the fact that their first act by hitting the dirt is to break our laws. When the very first thing that you do, when your very act of coming into a country is to break the law of the country you're coming into, you are automatically declaring your lack of respect for that country. But you would think they could at least, fake it, right? See, there was a time when legal immigrants coming into this country, legal immigrants, were so sold out for the American dream. They were so grateful to the country that they would not even let their own children speak anything but English at home in an effort to try to assimilate into the country that had given them a bright future and a sanctuary from whatever dumpster fire they had managed to get out of. It wasn't that they weren't proud of their heritage. It wasn't that they didn't bring some of their culture, their food, their music, their dress, whatever. But when it came to their nationality, when it came to how they identified, they began to see themselves and their children and any future generations of their family as American. They were no longer Irish. They were no longer Polish. They were no longer wherever they had come from. They were American. Perhaps they had an Irish history. Perhaps they had a Polish ethnicity, for their ancestry, but they identified as American. And they wanted so bad to be a part of this culture that one of the first things that they did was teach their children, we speak English here, because that is the language of our new country to which we now belong. But in 2023 America, we have traded that melting pot for this fetid stew of people who flout our laws and make no effort to hide their open disdain for the very country that they're demanding take them in. Example, this group of migrants who brazenly planted a Venezuelan flag on a small Texas-owned island in the middle of the river while they were illegally crossing it this week to get to the open border on the other side. Thankfully, a DPS tactical marine unit disposed of that pretty quickly, and hopefully they threw it in the trash can fire where it belongs, not because there's anything wrong with being Venezuelan, but when you come across to the United States and you plant a Venezuelan flag, you're not exactly communicating to the people over here that you're coming here because you want to be American. You want to be part of this country. You're sick of the one that you came from. It wasn't working out for you back there. Trust me, I've been to Venezuela. It's a garbage dump, literally a garbage dump. It has dumps of garbage. I saw places where children were living that I would not let my dog live. And that is exactly what socialism gets you. It does not shock me whatsoever that people in that country want to come to the United States of America. That doesn't surprise me. I completely get that. But when you come to this country illegally, you immediately declare that you don't care about our laws, therefore you have no respect for our nation, and you plant a Venezuelan flag on U.S. soil. That is a particular kind of offense. No longer are we talking about legal immigrants that want to come to America. You can't really argue that this is not an invasion when we have foreign nationals coming into this country illegally and planting another nation's flag in our ground. That is vomitous. And yet that's what we saw this week again, in the never-ending stream of people being allowed to come across the border. The vast majority of people who are coming across, by the way, are young men, as are evidenced by all of the videos that you see. It's not that there aren't women and children thrown into the mix, but if you look at any of these videos, it's streams and streams of young single men. And this is what data has borne out for years, by the way. If you go back and you look at the breakdown of illegal aliens apprehended at the border, for years, the vast majority of them have been single young males, often in their very late teens or more likely early adulthood. This is not a terrible shock, but that's not who the media chooses to talk about when they need sob stories to push to make all of this seem like this is really just a big humanitarian crisis and not a complete and total boondoggle. CNN ran a segment this week called Inside New York's Migrant Crisis. A father smiles to hold back tears as he looks for help that's costing the city billions. That was the headline, right? So what we really should feel bad for is this father who's got children, who is trying desperately to provide a better life for his family. Yeah, it's costing the city billions. Yeah, New York City is buckling. Yeah, New Yorkers are getting shoved out of, nursing homes and stuff to make room for these people. But really, we should feel bad for the father who came across illegally because for some reason, he could not be bothered to stand in line with all of the people from around the world who are queued up trying to get into this country legally, but who do not have the convenience of a land bridge to just, skip ahead of the line. Within this lengthy story is the story of another young woman CNN interviewed, and this is how they describe this. Get this. Medical care was a prime concern for Lady Kaiza, who was feeding a bottle to her 8-month-old baby, Mia. She told CNN they had left Ecuador because the father of her child kept threatening to hurt them and discriminated against Mia, who needs treatment for a health condition. She said, quote, "I feel happy because I'm here with my baby. I feel safe here. I'm scared of going back home because of the way he threatened us." Okay. So what you essentially have here is this is not somebody who's just fleeing poverty. This isn't somebody who's fleeing religious persecution. By the way, the definition for asylum seekers is very clear in our law. It's people that are fleeing their home country because of a well-founded fear of persecution, not because the economy in your country is garbage, not because the government in your country is just garbage, but when you are being actively persecuted for something like your race or, your religion. The definition of an asylum seeker is very clear, but, we kind of fudge that and expand it to basically anybody that wants to come here because they just don't like where they were before. Apparently that now expands to people who just were having domestic problems with their partner. It's not that I don't feel for this woman. I'm sorry that the guy with whom she had a baby ended up being a complete and total jackhole. I'm sorry that he was threatening to hurt them. That's horrible. Sounds like a problem for the local authorities, frankly, which is often a problem in Latin American countries. I understand that. I'm not saying that this is a good situation. I'm simply saying that nothing about the definition of an asylum seeker applies to a woman who is having problems with her domestic partner. And yet that's exactly what we have because see, we've blown open the doors and we've expanded the definition of asylum seeker to anybody that wants to come here for any reason whatsoever. And that is incredibly problematic because now you don't even really have to have a good reason. You can just say, well, my country sucks and I was having family problems, so here I am, take me in. And apparently we've decided that we have to say yes. And then we pack out our hotels and we pack out our shelters, and we're kicking actual homeless people out onto the street, and we're spending billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars in order to fund all of this. It's obvious how unsustainable this is it not? This shouldn't have to be explained. This is fairly common sense. All you have to do is look at it. New York City, for example, says that they're going to spend $1 billion over the next 3 years to house migrants in hotels alone. That's not all the other places they're being housed. That's not all of the resources they're getting, the food, all of that stuff. We're talking about the hotel bill alone, $1 billion over the next 3 years. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Back in August, Mayor Eric Adams estimated that it would cost a total of about $12 billion to house and care for the city's illegal aliens over 3 years. This is, of course, as he was begging for more aid from the feds, which comes courtesy of the taxpayers in all the other places across the country, you and me. We're now having to fork over our hard-earned dollars to send them to this sanctuary city that is now, all of the crap dropping geese are coming home to roost here. And they're having to take in all these people, and they've figured out that they can't actually do it. So you and I have to now fork out our money to help them do it because it's going to cost billions of dollars. This fiscal year alone, the city has figured that it will spend about $5 billion on the migrant crisis, which is as much as the annual budgets of the fire, parks, and sanitation departments combined. Of course, if you care about where your tax dollars are going, you should probably also care about where your health insurance dollars are going. Every single year, millions of Americans just like you pay exorbitant premiums for health coverage that you might not even need, only for your hard-earned dollars to go to subsidize medical procedures that you don't agree with, things like abortions or gender mutilation for children. That's where Share Healthcare can help. Share Healthcare is not traditional health insurance. It's a cost-sharing program between people of like faith who want to save money while making sure that they aren't funding things that violate their conscience. I'm partnering with Share Healthcare to let people know about their plans that start as low as $149 a month, making saving money and getting peace of mind never easier. So go to sharehealthcare.com, enter the referral code MRCTV23, that's sharehealthcare.com, MRCTV23, and find a plan that's right for you today. Governor Kathy Hochul announced another 150 National Guard personnel are going to be deployed to help deal with this crisis for a total of over 2,000 National Guardsmen in total that have been sent, again, not to help stop the problem, but just to keep the line moving. Because of those, 250 will focus just on case management for Venezuelans who are now eligible for temporary protected status, because that's Joe Biden's grand plan, right? That's his wet Band-Aid on this gunshot wound, is to give the green light for all of the illegal aliens who have come over from Venezuela to work. So TPS status, by the way, for those of you who don't know, temporary protected status, the way that this program is supposed to work, the reason that this even exists in the first place, is to say, like, let's say that you're coming over from country A, right? And you've got a student visa, and you're here legally. You didn't just hop the Rio Grande. You're here legally, and all of a sudden, through no fault of your own or anybody else's, an earthquake hits your country, decimates your town. You don't have a home to go back to. Your student visa runs out, but there's nowhere for you to go. Temporary protected status is supposed to ensure that people that find themselves in that situation can stay in the United States until conditions back in their home country become safe again and they can go back home. But that's not the way this program has been used, particularly under Democrat administrations. It's become a program that has provided de facto amnesty to illegal aliens from certain places for political reasons, okay? So now TPS status has been granted to Venezuelans in the United States who were here on or before July 31st of this year. So we're talking about illegal aliens who just hopped the border a couple of months ago. And as long as you were here before or on July 31st, you are now eligible for TPS status, which gets you a green card and access to a slew of other taxpayer resources. Not because something happened in your home country while you were here illegally that prevented you from coming back home, but because you happened to be here and the Biden administration has decided that it's politically expedient to try to make these blue cities that have been inundated with illegal aliens and are buckling under this. It's politically expedient to try to smooth things over with people like Mayor Eric Adams, who are going, look, we've got all these people, but they can't legally work. So Biden is saying, okay, well, we can fix that. Now we'll give them a green card. We'll make it so that they can legally work, so that they can go get jobs on their own, get out of y'all's hair, get out of your shelters. Doesn't matter that they're still here illegally. Doesn't matter that they butted the line. Doesn't matter that this is a gross abuse of the TPS program. We're going to make it so that they can work, so that it can relieve some of the pressure on these blue cities that are starting to get pissed off. And Biden can't have that. See how all of this works? That's not what TPS was supposed to be. And yet that's exactly how it's being used. And residents, by the way, are not happy about all of these laws that are being exploited and twisted to force them into taking in migrants. Just this week, Staten Island residents took to the streets in droves to protest migrants being housed at a vacant school, which is also close to other schools that are still in use. And apparently, some parents have a bit of a problem with that. Who would have thought? So New York City purchased this academy after it closed in 2018, and originally they had promised to turn it back into a school once again for the community because these kids have to go somewhere. Instead, the city has now converted the building into a homeless shelter for illegal aliens. Fancy that. Staten Island Supreme Court Justice Wayne Ozzie took the side of the parents who are pissed off about this and all the people in the community that didn't want this, and ruled that the building must be vacated. So there is a slight win. But this, by the way, is not the only school that's being turned into this, Hooverville for unemployed illegal alien border jumpers. If you think that you're paying too much for your kids' college, get a load of this. How would you feel if the expensive dorm room that you just, took out a second mortgage to try to afford for your kid was also being used by migrant families who get to stay there for free? Also on your dime, by the way. Migrant families will soon be living in dorms at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy campus at Columbia University. About 50 migrant families are already staying at the AMDA campus in Manhattan. Classes are set to begin on October 23rd, but the families are going to remain in the dorms throughout the school year. Sounds nice and safe, doesn't it? Not at all terrifying. Let's just stick some 17 and 18-year-old kids with some illegal aliens who, haven't been vetted and have a bunch of kids and whatever. What could possibly go wrong? Classes are supposed to start at the end of October, but these families are going to be in the same building, shacked up on the taxpayer dime for the remainder of the school year. And somebody actually thought this was a brilliant plan because, again, New York City has run out of room for these people. Funny. I guess you get what you ask for, right? You want to be a sanctuary, you got it. The situation is so bad that Mayor Eric Adams, who is a Democrat, by the way, who, if you recall, like 5 minutes ago, was praising his city's sanctuary status. We're welcome. We're welcoming to all. We want everybody to be able to come here. This is the American dream. Oh, just go somewhere else, right? Not in our backyard. We don't want that. They're now going to court. This is Eric Adams, right? Democrat, used to be all about sanctuary cities. Now going to court to get a judge to amend the city's right to shelter laws to exclude migrants. He now wants to exclude migrants from his city's right to shelter laws because it turns out you can't have an endless stream of them. The math don't work. The current law states that the city is mandated to give a bed to anyone who asks for one, i.e. the homeless. That's who this was intended to help, right? If somebody comes and says, I need a bed, I need shelter, you can't just let them sleep out in the cold. You have to give them aid. Adams is now asking the courts to omit migrants from that rule, saying that the law was intended to provide help for the traditionally homeless and not this endless stream of border crossers who are just showing up and demanding shelter by the thousands. Meanwhile, the city is changing a policy that will now allow homeless vouchers, which are paid for by the city, to be used outside the city's 5 boroughs. So this move essentially lets homeless people in the city go outside the city, move elsewhere, and get the Big Apple to pay for it. So the city figures that if local communities won't take in migrants, they'll at least take in the homeless, especially if they show up with checks from the city to pay for it. So we got to take care of all these migrants. We don't have any place for our own homeless to stay. We'll give them a voucher saying that we will pay for their hotel and they can take it outside of the city. And these communities will have to take them in. So now instead of getting a whole bunch of migrants, you're getting a whole bunch of vagrants. Sounds like a fantastic trade. This is the trouble with leftist proposals and policies in a nutshell. It is playing out in almost beautiful fashion. You can see a linear progression to where socialist left-wing policies get you. Not only do they not work, they leave such a train wreck that the whole entire house of cards starts to fall apart. The problem with mass illegal immigration perfectly encapsulates the problem with socialism, which not coincidentally is the economic boondoggle that turned so many Central American countries into dumpster fires and kind of helped trigger this flood in the first place. See, here we have people fleeing socialism, right? Only to end up in socialism-loving cities who are now finding out that handing endless droves of people a bunch of free stuff while overwhelming the people who are paying for all of it is not actually a sustainable business model. Who would have thunk? It's very similar actually to what's happening in Chicago. Have you seen this one? There's a Chicago alderman. He's a Democrat named Raymond Lopez, and he's now leading the charge to reverse Chicago's sanctuary city status because he and a few other Democrats have wised up to the fact that protecting criminal aliens might not be such a great idea, especially in a city that's already got its own massive crime problem all on its own. About 15,000 illegal aliens have been dumped in Chicago. That's a far cry from the 2 million or so that the Biden administration has released into the country at large in the past, not even 3 years at this point, but still. So here's the scene at Chicago O'Hare Airport where migrants are being kept behind a curtain. That's how the left likes to do it. Everything is behind a curtain, right? It exists, but as long as you can't see it, we'll just see no evil. And Lopez is now demanding that the city allow immigration and customs enforcement to once again begin taking custody of criminal aliens who are arrested in the city. Again, we're not just talking about any illegal aliens. We're talking about criminal illegal aliens who get arrested for committing a crime, irrespective of their immigration status. Because Chicago's current policy does not allow local police to turn an illegal alien in custody over to ICE, even if that person has an outstanding criminal warrant, a felony conviction, or is a known gang member. They could be a child molester, they could be a rapist, they could have shot somebody point blank with an illegal firearm in the middle of a busy intersection on a Sunday afternoon. It doesn't matter. Can't turn them over to ICE. And it turns out that's a really, really, really bad idea. Again, if only someone could have seen that coming. Kind of like how ending cash bail and upping the limit for felony grand larceny and limiting the kind of crimes that prosecutors can go after. How's that worked out for big cities? Looking at you, Philadelphia. All of these policies end up being disasters. And it takes disasters for people to finally start to realize this was not a good idea, because apparently some people cannot put two and two together, think a little bit further down the line and recognize this isn't going to end well. And they will not for the life of them listen to people who are saying this isn't going to end well. I'm not saying that because I'm some white person. I'm not saying that because I'm a conservative. I'm not saying that because I want to hang on to my tax dollars. I'm saying that because it is common sense. The math don't add up here. And that's where you find that you really have two different kinds of leftists, don't you? You've got the gullible kind that actually bought into this stuff and genuinely thinks that it works. And then they have to find out the hard way that it doesn't actually work, and who are now going, oh crap, maybe this was a poor life choice. Some are introspective enough to realize this and to make a change. Others cling to the notion that socialism and big government are actually fantastic ideas, and they just haven't been implemented correctly in like the zillion times that they've been tried throughout human history. And maybe if we just do socialism again, we'll finally get it right this time. It doesn't matter how many times that Hindenburg crashes and burns. We're going to keep trying this because eventually we'll get socialism right. It's a very particular formula, and we've got to just keep trying it. So you've got the ones that genuinely believe in this stuff because they have drunk the Kool-Aid. They've got all of the degrees on the wall from all of these ivory towers that convince them that this stuff makes sense, and it doesn't matter that the math doesn't add up. If you just wish it bad enough and you've got bleeding hearts and compassion and good fuzzy feelings, that's all that it takes. And then your city gets overrun with illegal aliens and you've got crime out the wazoo and you're going, this is not working out well. So that's the first kind. There's a second kind of leftist, though. The smarter and more nefarious kind, who knows full well that this stuff doesn't work. That's the whole point. The whole point for them is to create the chaos. The whole point is to fuel poverty and crime and depression. They don't want this stuff to go away. They don't want urban minority communities to be raised up. They don't want a break from addiction and substance abuse. They don't want an end to the crime. They want it. They need it because the point is to overwhelm cities. The point is to break down society. The point is to attack families. The point is to wreck the education system because only when everything has been decimated can it be rebuilt to favor those in power. They do not care if the world burns so long as they are the ones who are getting paid to hold the matches. They don't care. Notice how leftist policies go something like this. Create a problem, vow to solve the problem, then make the problem worse by implementing terrible policies, and then campaign on solving the problem, which you started in the first place, and then which your policies made even worse by spending more money and taking control. That's the progression. And around and around and around and around and around it goes. That is the point. That's why you don't actually see leftists trying to solve the immigration problem. Our immigration system is not broken, by the way. Whenever you hear anybody talk about the immigration system being broken, that is a lie. Our immigration law, if you read it in black and white, is actually very clear. Our laws and our definitions about asylum and who can seek it and where they have to seek it is very clear. Our laws on parole, very clear. Our laws on temporary protected status, very clear. And our laws and our definitions on who qualifies as an illegal alien who has no legal right to be in this country, very, very clear. What is broken is our will to enforce our immigration law. It is only a broken system because we have chosen to ignore it and bust holes in it to the point where it is spewing like a fire hydrant. There's nothing broken about it on paper. If we enforced our laws as they are written, we would be able to retain our own national sovereignty, and we would not have a spaghetti strainer for a border. But that is exactly what we've got, and that is the point. That is the goal. Leftists are not interested in solving it. Leftists are not interested in scaling back policies that have clearly led to crime and poverty and addiction. They want it. They need it. Because only then can they come in with big government and promise to fix all of these problems that are plaguing desperate people. And the only way that they can fix the problem is by taking total control. That is the goal. And it is not difficult to see if you have 2 retinas and more than 3 functional brain cells, I tell you. With that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll see you back here next week. Make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. While you're over there, make sure you subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Tim Graham. You do not want to miss that one. I'll see y'all back here next week. Have a fantastic weekend. God bless.